Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Little Horn. This is episode 2. I want to continue now looking into the sequence, and I want to show you today how, in particular, historicists and futurists place Daniel 7 into the future. And I'm not going to debate with that right now. I'm just going to show you in this video how they do that, and then we will look at it and we will look at that claim in the next video. Alright, so let's continue now in Daniel chapter 2. So we have the large metal man. Then we're told in verse 33 it has legs of iron, and then its feet partly of iron and partly baked of clay. And then if we go to Daniel 7, we see that Daniel in the night saw a fourth beast. It doesn't quite say what kind of beast this is. It doesn't say lion, leopard, bear, etc. All it says, a terrifying and frightening, very powerful beast. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all former beasts, and it had 10 horns. Alright, as we know from Daniel 7, beasts represent kingdoms, kings, and so what would be the next empire after Greece? The obvious one then would be the Roman Empire. Alright, most scholars have pretty much agreed that this fourth beast does represent the Roman Empire, but of course after the Greek Empire there was a time when Israel sort of had a time of independence under the Maccabees. There was also, before that, a time when Syria and Egypt sort of ruled. So they tend to skip those kind of empires, but I suppose we're focusing on the, major empires, if you like, and Rome would certainly be a very powerful empire at the time. Alright, so in terms of the timeline, Daniel, in his visions, is taken now to about 168 BC. That's when the Roman Empire came into power, so we've had at least a couple of hundred years. Do notice the connection between the leg of iron and the large iron teeth in the in the fourth beast. So obviously the iron is to be connected there with Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. You'll also notice that in Daniel chapter 7 verse 19 we're also told that this fourth beast has bronze claws, and you remember that bronze or brass was the middle thigh area of the statue man, which of course represented Greece. So some have pointed out the connection there. You would have the Greco-Roman Empire. So even though the Greek Empire had dissolved, certainly its influence was still there. I mean, writing, a lot of people spoke Greek, so Rome very much intermingled with Greek. The Greco-Roman society, which could be what the iron teeth and the bronze claws could be referring to there. Alright, this is where we begin now to move on into the sequence. So I want you to imagine we're taken up to 168 BC. Now, we know that from history the Roman Empire dissolved somewhere in 476 AD. Now, would Daniel have had that date and that revelation in mind? Because we know from Daniel, he certainly does go as far as to the time of Jesus, in AD 27 to 34 roughly, which we see in Daniel chapter 9. He also talks about the judgment when the people were shattered and scattered. Some people point to that as AD 70, when the Romans came and destroyed Jerusalem. So he goes up to AD 70 at least. Now, would he have gone up to AD 476? And this is how, using Daniel 7, people place the prophecy into the future. It comes from the number 10. So in Daniel chapter 7, we're told that we see this fourth beast, terrifying beast, and it was different from the others because it had 10 horns, okay? And we also know that those 10 horns represent a kingdom and kingdoms and a king. Then you would also see the number 10 with the 2 feet of the Iron Man, because 2 feet would mean we have 10 toes, and the 10 toes also represent kingdoms. Now I'll come back to Daniel 2 because we're told that the feet is made of iron and clay, so we have a different kind of metal there, different kind of substance. What would the clay represent? So I'll come to that. So we have the number 10 from both visions. Alright, an interesting verse is from Daniel chapter 2, going to verse 40 to 41. We're still talking about the fourth kingdom, legs of iron, it's strong as iron, and iron breaks everything. And then in verse 41 it talks about, just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Now, a lot of people point to the fact that Rome was divided between East and West because it was so large and it was impossible to manage all of it. So in 117 AD, the kingdom was split. That then leads into the 10 toes and the 10 horns. What would they be referring to? If we're talking about the Roman Empire, then the assumption is these 10 kingdoms come from within the Roman Empire. Alright, in Daniel chapter 7 then we're told that this fourth beast that has 10 horns, in verse 24, the 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. Now it's interesting, I think we do need to distinguish between, are we talking about kings or are we talking about kingdoms here, or would the two of them go into one? Are we referring to the same thing? Well, for those who follow any future prediction of this passage, this then refers to, they believe, the successor states of the Western Roman Empire after 476 AD. So that's how they place it into the future. We're gone as far now as 476 AD, the Roman Empire has crumbled, and then from it came 10 successor states. So that's how they pushed that into the future. Right, in Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, and it's just worth saying we only get this in Daniel 7, we don't see it in chapter 2. We're told in 7, verse 8, while I was thinking about the horns, that's the 10 horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Now in Daniel chapter 2 we're only told about the 10 toes, and then the rock comes down and crushes it. There's no hint of another toe coming up among the 10 or any kind of object coming up. So here in Daniel 7 we're sort of zooming in, if you'd like, on this sequence of time, and this little horn emerges up and destroys 3 of the other horns. So would this little horn also be referring to a kingdom? Now, the historical reference that people point to there to push this prophecy even further into the future is in 508 AD, when we have religious wars and 3 kingdoms were actually removed. We have, beginning in 508, the Visigoths were removed. In 534, the Vandals were removed. And then in 538, the Ostrogoths were removed. So right away from 605 BC, we're pushed now all the way to 538 AD. Alright, in my next video I'm going to talk about what is the little horn, but let me just continue with the time frame now. And please note, this is before the rock has come down and before these kingdoms are destroyed and the Ancient of Days takes his seat and one like a son of man comes to him. This is before any of that, okay? Now, in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, it says, the little horn, and he shall attempt to change the sacred seasons and the law, and they shall be given into his power. So that's the saints shall be given into his power for a time, 2 times, and half a time. Now, what is under consideration here is that that phrase represents a year, 2 years, and half a year. 3.5 years. We see that verse in the book of Revelation as well. Now, what some people do, both futurists and historicists, in order to move this into the future, they take literally the amount of days in 3.5 years, which amounts to 1,260. And then by applying the day for a year principle, I mean, we know that in prophecy a day does refer to a year, from Ezekiel chapter 4, for example. We now have 1,260 years, you see. Now, from after 538 AD, we have gone way into the future to 1798, 300 years or so before our time in the present situation. Now, the question is, what is the Little Horn if we go by this timeline? But I do want to end it there because, as I said, I'm taking this slow, so stay tuned for the next episode looking at what is the Little Horn.